Welcome to Ekvipage podcast with Helle. In this episode, Helle talks about her experiences working with horses in Australia while working at a cattle station and feedlot.
Hi everyone. In this podcast here, I want to talk to you a bit about my experiences from Australia. I'm a purebred Dane, and I've just visited Australia to do some work in my teenage years and up through my 20s. And yeah, it's just come to be very important to me what are the things that I've done, and I think I use it quite a lot when I look at horses and people together. Not because there was a lot of fantastic horsemanship, but more because I don't know how to explain that quite, but it sort of showed me a bit about what horses can do. I've been working in Australia when I was 18 years old, and I've been back there. I've actually been there 5 times now, and I haven't been working there all the time. The longest stay I've had has been 12 months. And what I did was I had this dream, I suppose, back in school. Actually started in my 4th grade when we had a subject on various countries, and I was in the group that had to work around us, like with Australia. And I was working with like what kind of wildlife was there, looking at the different animals and the different wildlife. And I was just like, I remember saying to my teacher back then, I want to go there. I want to go there as soon as I can because this is an awesome country. So I did when I was 18. And now I think a lot of people back then thought I was pretty crazy because what I wanted to do was to go work on a cattle station. My mum was scared shitless. I was so rude at that time. I was just like, get a grip, Mum. It's just Australia. It's just la la la. And today I'm looking back and like, wow, I would have, I don't know, she should have put me in chains or something to keep me from there. But nevertheless, I went and I had a fantastic time, and my mum survived as well as my dad back here in Denmark. The first thing I did was to work on a cattle station, and being from overseas, being a girl, I was the last one arriving. I think the other people arriving after me was people that had already worked there before on this particular cattle station. It was called Lissadell up in the Kimberleys. And wow, it was the bottom of the food chain, basically. That's the best way to describe it. And the guys I was working with were, I think the youngest one was maybe 16 and the oldest one was 25 or something. And there was only one other girl, and the 2 other girls came in later on. But there was one other girl when I started, and she was like, she'd been working there for a couple of years, so she was basically, living there. What happened is that I got there, and the head stockman wasn't too fond of me, I'm sure of it. I think he pretty much hated my guts. They got in some horses, and I did not have a clue on what was going to go, like how this was going to go or anything. No one really told me a lot. It was sort of like, well, you can tag along and find out. And so I was just sort of tagging along, and they got the horses in, and apparently this was shoeing day, getting the horses ready for the work that we were going to do over the next months and stuff. So I got 3 horses, Pinky, Tommy, and Bondage. I know, but that was his name. The head stockman took me into this shed, and he chucked this canvas thing at me, and it was rather heavy, and he was like, here you go, shoes are on these shelves. So that was my shoeing kit. And luckily, I've been in Denmark, I was always looking over the shoulder of my farrier, and I'm a very visual person, so that came in pretty handy because I had some idea of how to put a shoe on, despite I've never done it before. But I need to shoe these 3 horses. And being a girl, being 18, being from overseas, you just didn't want to go out and ask the guys for help. And if I did, I'm sure I wouldn't get it. Everyone was busy, and I just have this picture of it. Of course, I don't know who's listening in on this podcast. Maybe you're from Australia or something. But if you're not, I'm just going to try and paint this picture for you that I think there was like 10 guys there with, I don't know, 8 or 10 horses. Some were helping each other because the horses were too wild. They were collar roping some of them, like putting a rope around the neck, like a particular leather rope around the neck and around the, like over the back, and to jam up their hind legs because they were kicking that badly. Another guy was in the round pen chasing this horse around with ropes, and two other people I think was helping him and like hanging onto the legs with ropes. And this horse was frantic, kicking, biting, defensive. Then there was other guys with the horses tied up and yelling, and some were, thrown to the ground by the horses. Some horses were jumping around with guys hanging onto the front legs. It was a mess. It was like, I don't know, stepping into a John Wayne movie or something. For me at that time, it was like, aha. Luckily, I prepared myself for it because I knew everyone was like, you're going to be crazy. And I lived in Australia for a couple of months working at a banana plantation before I went to this cattle station. And I was talking to everyone about this is what I want to do, because it was important to me to know what to expect. And I got a bit of an idea of that from people's reactions. And they reckon I was a nutcase and that I wouldn't last. So I was sort of mentally preparing myself for it, and it was a good thing that I did that. So yeah, this was all as bad as I expected it to be, and I had my 3 horses to shoe. That's 12 shoes. That's a lot of nails, and yeah, I don't know. I did it. I just sort of went about it quietly. The horses I got was the one handled from Jules, the other lady out there that worked there the former years. And they were more quiet than the rest of them. They weren't as defensive, but still they were defensive. And I remember putting on a hind shoe on the bigger one, the one that was called Bondage. And he threw me. I was hanging, like I was on the leg. I was putting in the nails. And before I knew anything, he kicked his hind leg out. And he must have done it like with quite some force. But luckily I was on the leg. But he just threw me through the air and onto the side where I was jammed up against this iron rail, and the rail had this tin roof on for shading or for shade, and it made quite a noise, and everyone stopped and looked. No one yelled out if I was okay. No one came up, no one nothing, but they just stopped for a second, and they heard me moaning and groaning probably, and maybe they could see me getting up, and everyone just went back to work again. So that was basically what it was like. But it gave me a very, very, very good idea of how to get along, I think, when you need to, like when people are not too happy about you being around. And I managed to keep my shoes on longer than anyone else. I wasn't riding my horses that hard maybe. And then again, well, you don't have a choice. If the cattle is running, you got to get them. So... And basically these horses know what to do also. So, but I kept my shoes on. I did pretty good. And I even had one bloke walking past me and stopping. And he didn't say it to me, but he yelled out to another guy, said, these shoes don't look too bad. So that was, I think that was as good as it gets for a first timer in Australia. So the work we did on the cattle station was mustering, rounding up cattle, taking them in, sorting cattle, getting them ready for ships, for selling, drafting, all sorts of different stuff. And the main things that I remember, the impressions I got from it was riding for so many hours in the stinking sun and no water. The saddle would get that hot that even when you were wearing jeans, like when you were moving your legs would actually burn. Like the leather on the saddle would be that hot that it sort of hurt, like through the jeans. It was rough. It was being like out west, I reckon, out back of the boonies, but it was what I wanted to do. And these horses were amazing. I mean, they were treated so rough and poorly, and they were an instrument to work. These guys were not great horsemen, not at all, and I could tell even back then. I remember one stage we had, I don't know why we were, but we were picking up only 30 or 40 heads in a paddock somewhere. And up in the Kimberleys, there's a lot of rocks and there's a lot of spinifex, there's tall, spiky grasses, and there's a lot of bushes and a lot of holes and shit. And all of a sudden, these cattle start running, and we had to get them. And again, no one tells me what to do. So it's sort of, you just look at everyone and you try to figure out what your next move is going to be. And of course, it made sense that we're going to catch these ones. And so basically, these horses were running flat strap through this countryside. And I was hanging on for my life, pretty much. Rocks and scrub and spinifex and a lot of it. And I remember just having this trust, this thing, like I had my adrenaline, but that had many things to it. But just thinking, not being like, not having my focus on what could go wrong, but just having a focus on the fact that I wanted to disturb this horse as little as possible, because like he probably knew what to do, and he definitely needed to keep his balance in all this stuff here and all this scrub. So I was basically just hanging on and chasing these cattle. And afterwards you stop and you think about what you learn in Denmark and how you learn to look out and what you're getting told all the time, and what, like, how scared people are of horses breaking legs or getting injured, and you're not allowed to have holes, you're not allowed to have rocks on your paddock, you're not allowed to have this and that, and you clear it out for this and that. Hey, seriously, horses are so athletic and they can do all sorts of shit, even with a rider on top of them. They can manage on their own. They don't get hurt from, stuff in the paddocks. You don't have to clear everything out. The more they have out there to move around, the more athletic they get, I reckon. So I want to just quickly get around a very important thing that I did in Australia with horses that taught me a lot of stuff. The second time I was working on a feedlot. We had 16,000 cattle that we were feeding every day. This is not the same as a feedlot, is where they're put in big pens, and you're feeding them because there's not enough feed for them outside. And whereas a cattle station is where they're out living on their own. On the cattle station, it was 1.5 million acres, and it was 25,000 stock and 300 horses. This here was 16,000 stock, 16,000 heads, but in pens, and that meant that we were feeding them every day. So feeding, if it was raining, they didn't have a roof, of course. The feed would get wet and it was hot, so they weren't eating. They were just standing still in the rain. So we had to clean all the troughs afterwards, and that was done manually with a shovel. And they had, as far as I remember, they had 8 kilometers of concrete troughs. That's a lot of cleaning, I can tell you, especially if you're 4 people. That sort of comes down to 2 kilometers. That was an odd experience. One day, I was actually working on the mill, and on the mill, we did all the feed. So on the weekends, I was often, if I had some time, like when I had time off, I wasn't doing anything much. So I'd go down and ask if they needed a hand. And I got into, like, they were okay with me coming in riding with them. And the first time I did that was, I remember the head stockman was a young lady called Jo. And she asked me if I could ride because she wasn't going to be there that weekend. So I could have her horse, Phoenix, who was a 5-year-old gelding. And I suppose, like, it's pretty smart that I learned pretty fast that if I get asked in Australia if I can ride, I'm not going to say yes. I'm just going to say, well, a bit, but, not too much or something like that. So I got Phoenix to ride, and in the morning got in, started getting him ready. These horses are not at all as wild and crazy defensive as the ones on the cattle stations. They're better treated and they're more regularly put to work. This horse was a show horse. She took it to shows to do some cattle competitions and stuff, roping competitions and shit. So this horse was just a regular, well-mannered horse. You weren't in risk of getting kicked all the time. I remember saddling him, and when I was moving around him, I had this feeling that he was leaning towards me, but he wasn't moving his feet or anything, and he wasn't pushing on me physically. He was just sort of leaning. And this second time in Australia, I should say, was after I got my really good horse in Australia, in Denmark. This was not the second time. Hang on. This was the 3rd or 4th time in Australia. So I had already been to Australia and met the horse people Steve and Irene a halfpenny, and I've already been there and learned a lot. And I'd been training horses at home with some good horsemanship, some Pat Pirelli, some other stuff, and I had I basically had my stuff sorted out. I was a regular decent horse person at that time, and so here I am noticing that Phoenix is leaning on me, and I'm getting into this. I'm just sort of doing my nice horse stuff as I would with an ordinary horse in Denmark, because I knew my shit. I was pretty confident, and so I was doing this stuff, and I got on, and we had to walk a good K and a half, I reckon, to get down to where we were starting in the pens. And walking down, these horses are walking. They're walking out. And Phoenix was just falling behind all the time. And I was sort of smushing on him, telling him to, come on, get going. And as soon as he got going, I would be polite and release the pressure, say thank you. I was just being a good, decent, nice horse person. And he kept falling behind. So, we got down there, and I might have picked him up 5 times, 10 times, something. And we got down there, we started doing some work. And when you're working on a feedlot, you ride into these pens, and you got to ride in, and you get every single head of cattle up and standing so you can see if something's wrong with them. And you do this on horseback. You don't want to be walking in there because they're big fellows and they can still get pretty cranky. And we did this, and it was sort of the same feeling that I needed sometimes to tell him, oh, come on, get going. And I said, thank you, release the pressure. Everything was good. We had one job later on that day, or a couple of hours later, that we needed to take some bullocks up for send out on the trucks. And that meant we had to take them out of the pen, the paddock. And that was about 220 heads. So we were riding in, 5 or 6 riders, I think we were, and just squeezing them to a corner, getting them to run out the door, or run out the gate, and everything's good. And you had maybe 20, 30 heads playing around, getting all, worked up, running and bucking and stuff, and they didn't want to go out through the gate. So we were sort of just pushing them along, and all of a sudden, this bullock comes towards us. They're trying to run through us away from the gate. And these bullocks has been in there for some months, and the soil is absolutely jam-packed hard. And it had been raining a bit overnight, just the drizzle, so it was very slippery. And these guys dig holes. They dig really deep holes, like 50, 60 centimeters deep, and very wide, big holes. And we were riding around through these holes, and here comes this bullock chasing towards us. He wants to jump through. And of course he wasn't allowed to, so you need to turn your horses towards each other and close up and say, go the other way. And I needed Phoenix to do this, and he wasn't doing it. He was being very, very slack. And because I had this bullock chasing towards me, I was reacting very chop, and I got a bit sick and tired of him, and I just yanked him with my leg, like, come on, get into gear, we need to do this. Wow, this horse went nuts. He just threw his head down, turned 180 degrees or something, and he started bucking. He was just pig rooting through this paddock with me on, or through this pen with me on this slippery surface, through all these big giant holes, and I was hanging on for my life, trying to get his head pulled up. I managed to do it, and I managed to stay on, and I was like, wow, I'm still here. I was like, fuck, what was that? And this old ringer, who was a former rodeo rider, he writes up to me, and he's like, shit. I think he actually complimented me on staying on, and he was like, he's not allowed to do that. That is so dangerous. You're coming with me. And we went into this long straight piece behind all the paddocks where we were actually pushing the cattle into to take him away. And he told me to rough him up a bit. Not a bit. That's a lie. He told me to rough him up. So he was riding next to me. He said, you do exactly what I do. And we were cantering, stopping, turning, stopping, cantering, starting, trotting, stopping, cantering again. And it was just like, now. You do it now, now, now. Just no asking nicely, just an order, just a command, just to do it now. I want you to do it right now. I want you to do it this pace, this tempo, this everything. And we did that for a couple of minutes. And he was like, okay, now you go riding again. And this horse just completely changed. He was like all just nice and easy and doing whatever I asked him. And on the slightest hint, he was just ready and working, and everything was a complete opposite to what it'd been the entire morning. So that got me thinking, because what I was doing nice, girly, pretty stuff, I think, especially for this horse, that was used more like a work horse and ready to take an order. He was not used to being asked if he wanted to. Not even like, you can ask a question, can we please do that? And it's not really a question, but you're still willing to talk back and forth about it. You're willing, like, you're going to get what you want, but you're willing to talk back and forth. He was never asked in a way where it could become a discussion. He was asked just to do the job, and he was so ready for it when asked. So the determination of the rider, where I was always asking him and ready to talk to him and ready to negotiate and ready to, you don't have the time for that. Not when you're doing a job. And in the hobby world for people, I think there's a tendency to always come into that, like, either you order something but you do too much in a not a very good situation, or you always talk back and forth and are never willing to do the ordering thing, like to make an, like, just to say, this is an order, do this now. And you can say please, but you want it to be done now. So that taught me something about being determined to put my foot down. You can't always get the world to turn around by being nice. You gotta sort of put your foot down and just say, this is what I want. And it was quite okay. This horse just showed me that he was so much easier when that was done. It was his world, and he was confused basically with me being the way I was. I had a good timing. I had I released pressure at the right timing. I wasn't fussing about with him. I wasn't touching him or patting him all the time or anything. I was just releasing pressure with the right timing. But I was asking too nicely. I had to be more determined, have a plan, and just say, this is now. So yeah, I'm using that quite a lot when I talk to people and when I'm training horses, of course. But I think it's a major thing that you should be able to have the willingness of putting your foot down. So to round up this talk about Australia, I think the reason for me to talk about it is actually just that it's a great part of me. I think about it often when I'm training horses and stuff, because it's shown me, it was only some months. I mean, I haven't had a full life or anything. I wasn't a ringer. I was hardly a jillaroo. I was just a bloody tourist trying to, just live life and get some experience. Tourist out of the ordinary maybe, but nevertheless a tourist. But I think what it's just shown me, I just had a real deep look into what horses can actually do and how rough people can treat them and how they're still going to survive. So it's not to say that we should do that. I still, and I wouldn't go work on a cattle station again, I reckon, because it'll be too hard for me to turn the blind eye. But when we got all worried about our horses and the work we do with them and the setups we do, it's just way out. I think it could be so much more simple, and we have a focus on some of the wrong things sometimes. We want to do things so good for our horses, and we don't do the demands, or we don't set any demands to them, where they are quite capable of meeting demands and orders. If especially we have the ability to put it to them in the right way. You can do it like in the wrong way or in a very harsh way, or you can do it in a good way. And there's no need to be scared of that, because I think we can all benefit from it, and the horse world can be a lot more simple if we don't worry so much, basically. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's been a bit about what I've been doing my experiences and stuff, just a shallow look into it, but it's been great fun. I've done some crazy stuff, like some horrible stuff. I've been on the side to a lot of stuff down there, and I'm glad I did, because it's shown me a lot of stuff about, what the world looks like out there. And it's actually not all bad. There's some good things to it as well. So, I think that's that about sums it up for now. Thank you so much for listening in. It's been a pleasure going down memory lane on that one. I could talk for ages about Australia and all the cattle and the horses and stuff, but that'll bore you to death. So I'm going to stop now, and hopefully you're going to listen in on more podcasts to come. There'll be podcasts on various subjects, on all from management to horse training and stuff. So keep listening in, and I'll see you around. Take care until then. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to listen to the next episode where Helle talks about her business here in Denmark. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give us a rating, thumbs up, or a like depending on where you're listening. This helps more people find the podcast. Also, want to listen to the podcast before everyone else? Be sure to support us on Patreon. You can find a link in the show notes.